Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Kim Stanley Robinson's novel 2312. I'll talk a little bit about the author. I'll give a brief spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and then finish off by talking about what I'll be reading for next time. Kim Stanley Robinson is a sci-fi author. He's been writing for quite a long time. This is the second book of his that I've read. The first one was The Years of Rice and Salt, which is an alternative history novel in which the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, wipes out the entirety of Europe, almost the entirety of Europe. And so, as opposed to where in our society where Christianity rises to be the dominant religion in the world, it is actually essentially wiped out, and it's an alternative history of what would have happened in that situation. So I read that about 10 years ago, so it's been quite a while since I've read his stuff. He's also probably best known for his trilogy of books, the Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars series of books. This book, 2312, is a standalone novel. The brief, kind of spoiler-free review of the plot is it takes place 300 years in the future. It's a future in which the human race has expanded beyond just Earth. There's, I think, roughly 19,000 different environments where humanity exists. So everything from asteroids to the moons of planets to planets themselves. And Earth itself is due to climate change, even though there's about 11 billion people who still live on the planet, they have basically ecological disasters. The sea level has risen roughly 30 feet, and the people who live on there are culturally very different than everybody else, who they call spacers, who kind of live outside of off of Earth. And they, due to the difficulties on Earth, they don't really have animals. The animals have essentially all died out, and they live mostly off of food that's provided to them by the spacers. So the main character in this novel is a character named Swan. She lives on Mercury, and after her grandmother dies, her grandmother is a pivotal figure in kind of the colonization and the leading of Mercury. Once her grandmother dies, she kind of becomes involved in a plot that kind of takes her all around the galaxy, and it's not really a spoiler because I think it's the main thrust of the plot. But Mercury, her home planet, is attacked, and kind of the main thrust of the novel is determining why and who attacked her planet of Mercury. So that's a brief, spoiler-free version of the plot. It's a very long novel, so that's just a very brief part of it. What I thought was really interesting about the novel is there are many, many, many different ideas in the book. Everything from what I kind of mentioned before about Earth. In addition to that, the longevity of the characters has far surpassed what we have now. So there are characters who literally live for 200 years. And it's kind of mentioned in the book that there really is no upper limit on the lifespan. So it's possible these characters could live for thousands of years. The only kind of drawback to that is I believe it's once every 7 years the characters have to spend a year on Earth, which is kind of one of the reasons for the continued relationship between the spacers and people on Earth. There's also quantum computing. There's also a lot of the book deals with, we've gone past just kind of the two main genders to a multitude of different genders. There are, like I kind of mentioned before, terraforming. So there's a ton of different ideas in this book. The thing that I think he does best as a writer in the book, when she goes, the main character and other characters go to visit either planets or moons or asteroids, they're all kind of mentioned in lavishing detail to the point where it's very clear that Kim Stanley Robinson did a lot of research in this as to what these places would look like, especially after they become terraformed, which planets and which moons are probably going to be best suited for people to live on after they kind of leave the Earth. So I thought those were kind of the good parts about the book. I think the book ends on a very hopeful note, and I think it has actually a fairly strong ending at the very, very end of it. So I like those things. I think my biggest issue with this book, and I guess I should just say I had kind of a difficult time with this. I think people read sci-fi for different reasons. I'm much more of an action adventure person with kind of sci-fi trappings. That's how I kind of like my sci-fi stuff. So I'm probably much more in the like Neil Stephenson vein of science fiction than the Kim Stanley Robinson vein. Kim Stanley Robinson, a lot of this that deals with things almost on the philosophical level of what it means to be human, what it means to live as long as these characters do, what it would mean if you had a computer inside of your head, what kind of separates if you had a computer that was far advanced beyond being human to the point where it could do trillions of calculations a second. It's at what point does that computer reach consciousness, and does it ever? Is there ever a separate? Is there always going to be a separation between humans and a machine that would be able to do that? So there's that part of it. So I say all that to say this book is very, very slow. It takes its time to get kind of where it's going. I don't think it's very plot driven of a novel. I think it's more interested in kind of the philosophical and kind of going kind of on a tour throughout the galaxy and just kind of exploring these different places along with the characters. I think the plot doesn't really kick in until the first 100 pages or so. So if you like your science fiction kind of slow moving and philosophical and are really interested in just kind of having a bunch of different ideas, I think this is a really good book. For those things, for me, I wanted the plot to have a little bit more impact. The main character herself, Swan, is not necessarily a very likable character. She has several different kind of relationships throughout the novel that aren't explored in too much detail. The character herself has several different kind of, I don't want to go into spoilers, so I'll just be very vague, modifications about her that I think made her more of an interesting character to the author than it would be to necessarily you or me. The other part of it, the book that kind of bothered me, is if I had wanted a more of a plot-driven story, there is a plot in this novel, and I think there are one or two other characters who are mentioned. I think if this novel had been 200 pages and just followed those characters, I think it would have been a much better book, or much more in vein with what I wanted. So that was kind of frustrating. And I mentioned it before, there are a lot of ideas, even things like genetic modification and just a bunch of different ideas in this novel. And if you're someone who kind of likes the idea of, well, what is this going to be like in the future? What are some possibilities? I think this would be a good book. For me, it was a little overstuffed with ideas. I kind of wish he had kind of trimmed it back and had more of a focus on a few things. Kind of finally, the other thing that kind of irked me, there's a lot of world building that's done in interstitial chapters called extracts, which basically feel like textbooks, like that you're taking text from textbooks that were written in this universe, but they're not complete essays. They're like one or two sentences at a time. And so you really had to kind of piece together kind of the backstory of this world. And some of that involves, the terraforming. Some of it involves the politics. Some of it involves the economics. Some of it involves the gender stuff. And you're kind of having to piece that all together. And I kind of wish that instead of that method, I wish he had kind of done an essay, 2 or 3 pages just on this is how gender works in this universe, this is how the economy works. So because I kept reading and I kept asking questions of why is it like this way, and they never were quite answered. In a book that is this long, it was a little frustrating. So I would say I would recommend this book to people who are definitely more on the philosophical spectrum of kind of where you like your sci-fi. I don't necessarily think this is a bad book, but I definitely felt like it was very slow moving, and I didn't necessarily get all the questions I wanted answered. So that's 2312 by Kim Stanley Robinson. Next time I'll be rereading, I believe it is called The Song of Kings by Barry Unsworth. Until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and feel free to leave comments in the section below if you're a Kim Stanley Robinson fan and you have other books of his that you liked a little bit more than this, or if you felt strongly about this book, please let me know. Till next time, bye.